The Packard's phone hummed, a low, insistent thrum against the leather of the passenger seat. I almost ignored it. Pranks were a common irritation, a petty tax levied on those who operated outside the polite confines of society. Still, curiosity, a weakness I rarely indulged, compelled me to answer. "Owen Fitzwilliam," I stated, the words clipped and precise, static. A brittle crackling like dry leaves, skittering across pavement, filled the line. Then, a voice, flat, toneless, reciting a single name, Owen Fitzwilliam. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the bronze light of the late afternoon catching the chrome trim. Absurd. Someone had gone to the trouble of mimicking my voice, recording it, and leaving it on my phone. Juvenile. I tossed the device onto the seat beside me, the leather sighing under the impact. The videotape was next, taped to the dashboard, nestled amongst the legal documents and loan agreements. The label, handwritten in a spidery script, mirrored the voicemail. I retrieved it, the plastic cold against my fingertips. The player word, a mechanical sigh, and the screen flickered to life. The image that appeared was me, or a grotesque parody of me. I was standing in what appeared to be my office, but the angles were wrong, the perspective skewed. My movements were exaggerated, jerky, as if a marionette controlled by an unskilled hand. I watched myself pace, a predatory grace twisted into something unsettling. The room pulsed with a sickly bronze light, the shadows deepening in the corners. A tremor of something ran through me. Discomfort, an anomaly in the expected order of things. I focused on the details, forcing myself to analyze, to compartmentalize. The wallpaper, a faded damask, seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. The scent of dust, thick and stale, clung to the air. Each drawer I opened in the video, a pointless, repetitive gesture, produced a dry, rasping sound. Outside the Packard, the National Park trailhead loomed. The trees stood motionless, their branches skeletal against the unchanging light. It felt wrong, like a stage set meticulously constructed but utterly devoid of life. The air hung heavy, a physical pressure against my skin. A black cat emerged from the shadows, its form coalescing from the gloom. Its fur was the color of a moonless night, and around its neck, a broken porcelain collar lay fractured. It sat, regarding me with an unnerving stillness. A low purr, a vibration more than a sound, resonated through the air, a subtle pressure against my skull. I felt a tightening in my chest, a burgeoning sense of what? Resentment? Regret? The cat's purr intensified, amplifying the feeling. I tried to rationalize. Coincidence, a prankster with an unhealthy obsession, but the swarm of flies circling an invisible point above the trailhead defied logic. Hundreds of them, a black cloud against the bronze sky, buzzing with a frantic energy. They moved as a single entity drawn to something I couldn't see, couldn't comprehend. The buzzing morphed into a high-pitched whine, a dissonant chord against the silence. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. My reality was a carefully constructed edifice, built on logic and ruthless efficiency. This was a crack in the foundation. A fissure spreading through the concrete. The videotape continued. The distorted version of myself continuing his pointless pacing. The image sharpened briefly, revealing a fleeting glimpse of something behind me. A shadow, a suggestion of something vast and unknowable. The buzzing of the flies grew louder, more insistent. The cat's purr became a palpable weight. Then, abruptly, the screen cut to black. The static returned, harsher now, accompanied by a single distorted image replacing the darkness, the cat's eyes. Pools of obsidian, reflecting nothing, promising everything. The Packard idled, the engine a low growl against the oppressive stillness of the trailhead. The cat remained, a black sentinel at the edge of the shadows. Its obsidian eyes, reflecting the bronze light, seemed to bore into me, a silent accusation. The image of those eyes burned onto the screen, pulsed behind my eyelids. I swallowed, the movement a dry rasp in my throat. The buzzing of the flies persisted, a frantic tremor in the air. Another voicemail. The phone hummed again, a persistent, unwelcome guest. I ignored it initially, dismissing it as another annoyance, but the insistent thrum burrowed into my focus. "Owen Fitzwilliam," I said, the words tasting like ash. The static returned, brittle and sharp. Then the voice, not the flat, toneless recitation of the previous message. This one held a tremor, a vulnerability that felt wrong. "Remember the picnics, Owen? The honeysuckle and the laughter." The voice trailed off, swallowed by the static. Picnics, honeysuckle, laughter. The words were foreign, echoes of a life I didn't recognize. A flicker of something tendine day, a memory struggling to surface, fizzed and brushed against my consciousness. A faded image of a checkered blanket, a basket overflowing with fruit, the scent of sweet blossoms. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind a residue of confusion and a deeper unease. The cat's purr deepened, a low vibration against my skull. It turned its tail twitching and began to move deeper into the woods. An invitation, a command. I hesitated. Logic dictated I remain in the packard, analyze the situation, formulate a plan. But the unsettling feeling, the anomaly in the expected order of things, was intensifying. I followed the trail narrowed, the trees crowding in, their branches intertwining overhead, blotting out the bronze light. The air grew heavy, damp, thick, with the scent of decaying leaves and something else. Something indefinable, like the ghost of a forgotten perfume. The ground beneath my feet was soft, yielding, a carpet of damp moss and fallen pine needles. Each step produced a muted crunch, a subtle disruption of the oppressive silence. Another voicemail. This time, the voice was closer, more intimate. "The quilt, Owen. Do you remember the quilt?" The rustling of parchment accompanied the words, a faint whisper within the static. The sound resonated with a disturbing familiarity. I stumbled, my hand instinctively reaching out to steady myself against the rough bark of a pine tree. My fingers traced the grooves in the wood, the texture unexpectedly familiar. A memory sharper this time surfaced, a woman's hands nimble and deft, stitching a vibrant tapestry of scenes, a hand-stitched quilt. The cat paused, its eyes fixed on something ahead. I followed its gaze and saw it flash of color amidst the gloom. A quilt draped over a fallen log. It was larger than any quilt I'd ever seen, the fabric a riot of faded colors depicting scenes of. What? I approached cautiously, the buzzing of the flies intensifying a discordant chorus. The quilt depicted a landscape, but it was distorted, unsettling. Houses crumbled, trees withered, people fled in terror. Each scene was rendered with a meticulous detail that bordered on obsession. The colors were muted, dominated by shades of bronze and shadow black. "Remember the fireflies, Owen?" The voice whispered in my ear, a phantom breath. The laughter around the fire. I traced a finger across the quilt, the fabric rough against my skin. The stitched scenes seemed to shift, to writhe before my eyes. A scene depicting a picnic eerily similar to the fleeting image that had surfaced earlier. The woman in the scene, 40, her face obscured by shadow foot, held a basket overflowing with fruit. Honeysuckle blossoms framed the scene. Laughter echoed from the fabric. The cat nudged my leg, its purr a palpable pressure. It turned, leading me deeper into the woods, the quilt receding into the shadows. The trail itself seemed to be changing, the trees bending at unnatural angles, the ground undulating beneath my feet. I attempted to reconcile the shifting landscape with my memories, but the effort was futile. The trail twisted, a labyrinth of shadows and distorted perceptions. The final voicemail arrived, the voice laced with a profound sadness. "It's all fading, Owen, don't let it fade." Then, a single stitch fell from the quilt, a tiny thread of crimson against the mossy ground. As it fell, the fabric behind it parted, revealing a fleeting glimpse of a shadowed figure standing just beyond the quilt's edge. A figure I couldn't quite see but felt, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. The trail twisted, the trees blurring into a monochrome wash of bronze and shadow black. The buzzing of the flies had become a constant hum, a physical pressure against my eardrums. I stopped, the damp moss clinging to my boots, the scent of decay thick in my nostrils. The last voicemail. "It's all fading, Owen, don't let it fade." Another one. The phone vibrated in my pocket, a frantic pulse against my thigh. I ignored it for a beat, forcing myself to focus on the immediate, the rough texture of the pine bark against my palm, the damp chill seeping into my bones. But the insistent buzz returned, a relentless demand. "Remember the fireflies, Owen?" The voice, softer now, almost mournful. The laughter around the fire. Fire. The word hung in the air, a phantom echo. The buzzing intensified. I fumbled for the phone, the screen illuminating my face with a sickly bronze glow. "The laughter," the voice repeated. The last word. Fire, distorted, elongated, almost painful. I winced, the sound reverberating within my skull. A flash of memory, a dimly lit room, the sickly sweet smell of cheap whiskey. A man's face contorted in a silent scream. A debt collected. The details were hazy, fragmented, but the feeling of cold satisfaction remained, a residue of the man I was, or thought I was. The cat's purr deepened, a resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It turned its head, its obsidian eyes fixed on something beyond me. I followed its gaze, and the trail seemed to shift again, the trees swaying in a non-existent breeze. Another voicemail. "The ledger. Owen, do you remember the ledger?" "Ledger." The word echoed, a hollow clang within my mind. I pressed my temples, trying to block out the incessant repetition. The memory of the ledger surfaced, a thick leather-bound book filled with names, amounts, and meticulously recorded dates. A record of my transactions. But the faces associated with those names, they weren't right. They were distorted, subtly wrong. The man who owed me $5,000, his face stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile. The woman who'd signed away her bakery, her eyes filled with a bottomless sadness. Each face a warped reflection of their former selves. The buzzing of the flies grew louder, a frantic swarm coalescing around a single point in the air, foggy, a shimmering, distorted vortex. I blinked, and the trees seemed to sway in rhythm with the buzzing, the bronze light flickering like a dying flame. The ledger, Owen. The voice closer now, a breath against my ear. Ledger, die stillness, stillness. I stumbled, the ground undulating beneath my feet. The cat brushed against my leg, its broken porcelain collar clicking softly against my trousers. The sound was jarring, out of place in the oppressive stillness. Another voicemail. The fear. Owen, do you remember the fear? Fear, the word reverberated, twisting within me. I felt a cold dread creeping into my bones, a primal terror I hadn't experienced in years. The faces in the ledger, they weren't just distorted, they were filled with twin fear. My fear. I tried to recall the faces of those I'd collected debts from, the fear in their eyes, but the memories were fragmented, unreliable, as if filtered through a layer of distortion. Each recollection felt like a lie, a manufactured emotion. The fear, Owen. The voice a whisper in the shadows. Fear. The cat began to move again, deeper into the woods, its purr a palpable pressure against my skull. I followed, my legs heavy, my mind reeling. The trail seemed to be closing in, the trees pressing against me, their branches scraping against my skin. Another voicemail. The names, Owen. Do you remember the names? Names? The word echoed, a hollow, desolate sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to grasp at the fragments of memory, to recall the names etched into the ledger. But they were elusive, shifting like sand through my fingers. Then it struck me. The repeating word wasn't a random occurrence. It was a name I didn't recognize. A name that echoed in the darkness, a chilling premonition of something I couldn't comprehend. The buzzing intensified, the trees swayed, the cat's purr resonated, and I realized the voice was not repeating the last word spoken, but the name of someone I was supposed to remember, a name I couldn't. The cat moved with an unsettling certainty, its broken porcelain collar clicking against the undergrowth Chauvendet, a brittle counterpoint to the buzzing that now felt less like a sound and more like a vibration in my bones. The trees thickened, the bronze light fading to a perpetual twilight. Each step was an effort, the damp earth sucking at my boots. The air tasted of moss and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old pennies left to rust. The cabin materialized abruptly, a squat, dark shape swallowed by the trees. It wasn't on any map, wasn't mentioned in any park literature. Just there. The cat slipped inside, its tail a twitching signal. I hesitated, the feeling of being watched prickling the back of my neck. The buzzing intensified, a frantic insistence. The door groaned open, a long, mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the wood itself. The interior was a single room, choked with dust and shadows. A single table dominated the space, draped with a quilt. The quilt, it pulsed with a faint internal light, the stitched scenes shifting subtly as I watched. A man falling from a cliff, a child lost in the woods, a house consumed by flames. Each image felt familiar, yet alien. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a brittle chorus accompanying the buzzing. I moved deeper into the room, my hand brushing against the rough-hewn walls. The smell of decay was stronger here, overlaid with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. Against one wall, a stack of videotapes. Each label bore my name, Owen Fitzwilliam. A cold dread settled in my gut, heavier than the damp chill in the air. I picked one up, the plastic casing slick and cold against my skin. The buzzing seemed to coalesce around the tape, a frantic, shimmering halo. The names, Owen. Do you remember the names? The voice echoed in my head. A phantom whisper. I pressed play, static. Then, a distorted image of myself, younger, harder, standing in a room identical to this one. The image flickered, fragmented, then dissolved into a swirling vortex of light. The buzzing became almost unbearable. Another tape, another distorted image, another fragmented memory. They were all me, but not me. Each recording seemed to depict a different version of my life, a different set of choices, a different set of consequences. The quilt pulsed brighter, its stitched scenes growing more vivid, more disturbing. I found the ledger then, tucked beneath the table, bound in cracked leather. The same ledger from the voicemail, but here it felt real. The names were there, meticulously recorded, alongside amounts and dates. But beneath each name, a sketch. Crude, unsettling drawings of the quilt. Each sketch highlighted a different scene, a different detail. A man's terrified eyes, a child's outstretched hand, a house engulfed in flames. The faces in the ledger, they were the faces I'd collected debts from. The faces I'd thought were deserved victims. But the sketches, they suggested something else. Something more sinister, a pattern, a connection. The quilt wasn't just a depiction of doom, it was a futavis. The buzzing reached a fever pitch, a physical pressure against my temples. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, the air thick with the scent of decay and something else. Something wrong. A new memory surfaced, unbidden, unwanted. A conversation, a man's voice distorted and echoing. The quilt records their suffering, Omen their fear, their despair. The voice wasn't familiar yet, somehow. I recognized it. It resonated within me, a discordant note in the symphony of dread. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The voicemails weren't random. They weren't a warning. They were a guide, a manipulation. The cat let out a low, guttural growl, its obsidian eyes fixed on the quilt. The quilt pulsed, radiating a wave of heat that washed over me. The buzzing abruptly ceased, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Then, a new voicemail. The tone was different, colder, more detached. The observation point, Owen, awaiting your arrival. The silence after the buzzing stopped was almost worse, a vacuum pressing against my eardrums. The cat, a black silhouette against the pulsing quilt, remained motionless. Its broken porcelain collar clicked softly as it shifted, a brittle punctuation to the oppressive quiet. The observation point, the voicemail had said, awaiting my arrival. The phrasing was clinical, devoid of inflection, yet it resonated with a chilling certainty. The climb was brutal. The trail, barely discernible, wound upward through a tangle of gnarled trees. Each footfall crunched on decaying leaves, the sound amplified in the stillness. The bronze light, which had been dim, now seemed to actively recede, swallowed by the deepening shadows. The air grew colder, the metallic tang of old pennies intensifying, mingling with the damp, earthy scent of the forest floor. I tasted grit on my tongue, a phantom residue of the cabin's dust. The observation point materialized abruptly, a precipice overlooking a valley shrouded in a perpetual twilight. It wasn't a scenic vista. It was wrong. The landscape swam before my eyes, the familiar contours of the park distorted, warped. Trees twisted into impossible angles, their branches skeletal against the gray sky. The valley floor seemed to ripple, the ground undulating like a disturbed pool of water. Something was off, terribly, fundamentally off. The cat, as if on cue, settled onto a moss-covered rock, its obsidian eyes fixed on the valley below. It didn't blink, its gaze felt knowing. A conduit, as the voicemails implied, a translator of something I couldn't comprehend. A gentle rustling of parchment, like a memory struggling to surface, echoed in my mind. I scanned the valley, movement peripheral, fleeting figures, indistinct shapes shifting amongst the distorted trees. They weren't human, not entirely. Their forms seemed to blur, to coalesce and dissolve like phantoms struggling to maintain their shape. The muffled whispers began then, a chorus of voices too low to decipher, swirling around me like a phantom breeze. They seemed to emanate from the valley, rising and falling with the undulating ground. Then I saw it, an antique camera, resting on a weathered tripod near the edge of the precipice. It was an old model, a bellows camera with a massive lens. The lens was focused, pointed directly beyond the valley toward a point I couldn't see. It felt intentional, as if it had been waiting for me. The cold seeped deeper into my bones, a damped chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I approached cautiously, the crunch of leaves under my boots sounding unnervingly loud. The camera was pristine, as if it had been recently cleaned. A single, leather-bound notebook lay beside it. I picked it up, the leather cool and smooth against my skin. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, observations recorded in elegant script, dates, times, descriptions of the valley's distortions. The writer, whoever they were, had been documenting this anomaly for years. The whispers intensified, coalescing into fragmented phrases. The veil, the other side, the observer. My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes, the quilt, the ledger, the voicemails. They were all pieces of the same puzzle, a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. A wave of nausea washed over me. The figures in the valley seemed to draw closer, their indistinct forms becoming more defined, more unsettling. I felt a growing sense of dread, a suffocating certainty that I was being watched. Not by the figures in the valley, but by something else. Something unseen. I looked into the camera's lens and saw a reflection. Not my own. A distorted image, fractured and fragmented. A mockery of my face twisted into a grotesque parody of a smile. The reflection wasn't simply into the lens, it was sub-emerging from it, slowly pushing my own image aside. The whispers swelled, drowning out all other sound. The parchment rustling became a frantic, desperate plea. The valley rippled violently, and the distorted reflection solidified, staring back at me with eyes that weren't my own. The reflection solidified, the alien eyes holding mine. A pressure built behind my temples, a throbbing counterpoint to the whispers that now felt less like voices and more like tendrils, probing, searching. I stumbled back from the camera, the notebook clattering against the mossy rock. The valley continued its sickening undulation, the figures within seeming to lean forward expectant. The cat, still perched on its stone, emitted a low, resonant purr. It wasn't a comforting sound. It felt like an amplification, a resonance chamber for my burgeoning panic. I turned, desperate to escape the precipice, the feeling of being watched a physical weight on my shoulders. The forest pressed in, the gnarled trees seeming to twist and writhe in the fading bronze light. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a pool of rainwater collected on a broad leaf. The face staring back wasn't quite right. The eyes were too wide, the mouth a fraction too thin. A fleeting flicker, gone before I could truly register it. This time, in the polished surface of a discarded tin can. The same distortion, the same unsettling alteration. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The air tasted like ozone and decay. The metallic tang of old pennies intensified, a phantom scent clinging to the back of my throat. The gentle rustling of parchment echoed in my mind, a mocking reminder of the notebook left behind. The voicemails, they weren't just cryptic instructions. They were memories. Fragmented, distorted, but undeniably mine. Lost her. The fire. A woman's voice, choked with grief. The ledger, the debt, a harsh masculine tone, laced with regret. I didn't remember a fire. I didn't remember a woman. My past felt like a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a distorted, unfamiliar image. I found a small, tarnished mirror hanging from a low-hanging branch. An accident or deliberate placement. I stared into it, bracing myself. The face that stared back was subtly wrong. A slight asymmetry in the jawline. A faint scar I didn't recognize tracing the curve of my eyebrow. The smile, it was there, a brief, unsettling contortion of the lips. Not my smile. A predatory curve, alien and mocking. A hairline fracture spiderwebbed across the mirror's surface. The cat's purr intensified, vibrating in my chest. It felt like a physical force, pushing me deeper into the labyrinth of my own fractured memories. I reached out, intending to brush against its fur, but recoiled as I felt a strange, almost reptilian texture beneath my fingertips. The fur seemed wrong, not soft and plush, but stiff and brittle like dried straw. A faint, metallic rasp accompanied the sensation, a sound that scraped against my sanity. More photographs, scattered amongst the fallen leaves, damp and faded. Images of me, at different ages, a boy laughing in a sun-drenched field. A young man standing proudly in a tailored suit, a hardened figure, his face etched with lines of regret. Each photograph was subtly altered. The boy's smile was too wide, the young man's posture too rigid, the hardened figure's eyes too cold. Someone had been tampering with my memories, rewriting my past. The shattering of glass echoed through the trees, a sharp, discordant note in the oppressive silence. I spun around, searching for the source, but found nothing. Just the distorted trees, the undulating valley, the ever-present feeling of being watched. My reflection in a puddle seared a brief, horrifying glimpse of a face that wasn't my own, a face that wore a smile that wasn't mine. The smile widened, stretching the lips into an unnatural, grotesque curve. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of triumph, a smile of possession. The reflection wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It was consuming me. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling voice, echoing in my mind. "Welcome home, Owen." The smile widened, stretching the lips into an unnatural, grotesque curve. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of triumph, a smile of possession. The reflection wasn't just mimicking me anymore, it was consuming me. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling voice, echoing in my mind. "Welcome home, Owen." The words weren't spoken, not precisely. They resonated, a vibration in the bone behind my teeth, layered over a chorus of others. The woman's choked grief, the man's regretful tone, snippets of conversations I couldn't place, all swirling into a nauseating maelstrom. The air thickened, the bronze light dimming further, swallowed by an encroaching shadow black. I stumbled, the forest floor tilting beneath my feet. The trees seemed to lean in, their gnarled branches intertwining to form a suffocating canopy. The cat, a black silhouette against the gloom, emitted a low, guttural rumble. It wasn't a purr anymore, it was a resonance, a physical tremor that shook the ground beneath me. The broken porcelain collar clinked, a brittle, mocking chime. I felt a pressure in my chest, a tightening that made it difficult to breathe. The scent of ozone intensified, mingling with the sickly sweetness of decay. Then it appeared. Not to impede the reflection, but to NDSI the reflection. A shifting, amorphous form coalesced from the shadows, its edges blurring, resolving, then blurring again. It wasn't solid. It was a tapestry of fractured images, whing glimpses of faces. I didn't recognize landscapes I'd never seen, moments of unbearable pain. And within that chaotic swirl, my own face stared back, distorted, elongated, fragmented. The chorus of voices amplified, each fragment of memory a shard of glass piercing my consciousness. Lost her, the fire, the ledger, the debt, they weren't just voices anymore. They were suipartsi of the being, echoes of lives lived and lost, trapped within its form. I pressed my hands against my temples, a futile attempt to silence the cacophony. The feeling of being watched intensified, a weight pressing down on my skull. "You remember," the composite voice said, the words a jumble of tones, male and female, young and old. It wasn't accusatory, not exactly. It was observant. "The memories are returning. The veil is thinning." I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. My limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The forest seemed to close in, the trees pressing against me, their bark rough against my skin. The being's form shifted, solidifying momentarily into the image of the woman from the voicemail. Her face was contorted in grief, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then it dissolved, reforming into the hardened figure, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. The cycle repeated, a dizzying carousel of fragmented identities. The metallic rasp of the cat's fur seemed to synchronize with the shifting forms, a rhythmic pulse that resonated deep within my bones. "We are the echoes," the voice continued, the tones blending into a single, chilling harmony, the forgotten, the discarded, the suffering. I felt a wave of nausea, a visceral understanding of the immense weight of the being's existence. The photographs scattered on the ground seemed to swirl around me, their faded images blurring into a single, overwhelming mass. The boy's laughter, the young man's pride, the hardened figure's regret fudi, all mingled into a single agonizing memory. The quilt, previously unnoticed, lay draped over a fallen log. I hadn't seen it before. The stitching was crude, the colors faded, but the scenes depicted were horrifying. Fires consuming homes, bodies suspended from trees, faces contorted in agony. It wasn't just a quilt, it was a record, a chronicle of suffering. The gentle rustling of parchment filled my mind, a mocking reminder of the notebook left behind. "You were chosen, Owen," the being said, the voice now a clear, resonant tone devoid of the fragmented echoes. "To witness, to witness." I looked down at my hands, seeing them tremble, not with fear, but with a profound sense of purpose I didn't remember choosing. The swarm of flies circled above, a black vortex against the fading light. The smell of decay intensified, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. "You have a choice, Owen," the being continued, its form shifting one last time, solidifying into a perfect replica of my own face, the unsettling smile now fixed in place. "Embrace the truth, become one with the echoes, or remain trapped in your fabricated reality, a prisoner of your own ignorance." The cat's purr intensified, vibrating in my chest, a relentless pressure pushing me towards a decision I wasn't sure I had the strength to make. The quilt. It lay there, a silent accusation draped over the fallen log. The images swam before my eyes, the fires, the bodies, the faces, Habai, a grotesque tapestry of suffering. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and something else, something indefinable like burnt sugar and old grief. A persistent tick-tick. Tick heat resonated in my ears, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to emanate from the quilt itself. It wasn't a clock I could see, but the sound was precise, measured, almost mocking. I knelt, the damp earth seeping through my trousers. The quilt's stitching was crude, amateurish, yet the scenes depicted were rendered with a chilling clarity. I ran a gloved hand over the faded fabric, the texture rough against my skin. It felt wrong, not just old, but tainted. The cat, a black smudge against the deepening gloom, circled the quilt, its movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The purr intensified, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, through my bones. It wasn't a pleasant sound anymore. It was a key, unlocking something within me. I focused on a section depicting a house engulfed in flames. The faces of the people fleeing were blurred, indistinct, but I felt a pang of recognition, a flicker of memory elusive and fragmented. I leaned closer, my breath misting in the cold air, and then I saw them. Not faces, but symbols. Woven into the fabric, almost imperceptible, were markings, 7 stylized glyphs, archaic runes. I recognized them, not from conscious memory, but from a deep, buried place within my mind. They corresponded to the names and faces in the ledger, the debt, the fire. It all coalesced, a horrifying realization dawning within me. The quilt wasn't just a record of suffering, it was a map, a chronicle of something specific, something that had happened here in this park, a catastrophic event meticulously documented, woven into the very fabric of this. The tick, tick, tick intensified, echoing the pounding in my chest. The cat paused its circling, its yellow eyes fixed on mine, pupils dilated, reflecting the bronze light like pools of molten gold. It emitted a low hiss, a distorted exhale that seemed to resonate directly within my skull. "It's more than just a quilt," I murmured, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The being's voice, that composite chorus of fractured memories, echoed in my mind, not as a direct communication, but as a confirmation. "You see now, Owen, the patterns, the connections." I fought the rising panic, the urge to flee, to deny what I was seeing. But the evidence was undeniable. The quilt was a key, unlocking a door to a past I had no memory of, yet somehow knew intimately. I traced the symbols with my finger, the quilt's texture becoming increasingly vivid, the images sharper, more defined. The faces of the victims solidified, their expressions contorted in terror, their eyes filled with a desperate plea. The cat began to purr again, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to synchronize with the unraveling of my sanity. I felt a pressure in my temples, a tightening that made it difficult to breathe. The forest seemed to lean in, the trees pressing against me, their branches like skeletal fingers. The being's form shimmered, momentarily resolving into the image of the man from the voicemail, his face etched with regret. Then it dissolved, reforming into the woman, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The cycle repeated, a dizzying carousel of fragmented identities. The tick-tick-tick became a relentless drumbeat, driving me towards a breaking point. I had to understand. I needed to understand. My gaze fell upon a loose thread, a single strand of crimson yarn protruding from the quilt's edge. I tugged at it gently, and with a soft tavadi, a hidden compartment opened, revealing a small, tarnished key. It was old, the metal corroded, the design intricate and unfamiliar. It felt cold, heavy in my palm. The cat let out a sharp, piercing cry, a sound of both triumph and warning. The being's voice resonated within me, a single, chilling tone. "The door awaits. Owen, the truth lies beyond." The key felt impossibly heavy, a solidified weight of dread in my palm. The cat, its porcelain collar clicking softly against the damp earth, watched me, its yellow eyes burning into my back. Asterisk, "The door awaits, Owen. The truth lies beyond." Asterisk, the being, S words resonated, not as a voice, but as a certainty, a cold logic that bypassed my conscious thought. I knelt again, the earth clinging to my trousers, and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a groan of protesting metal, a drawn-out sigh that echoed the years of silence it had endured. The door swung inward with a rush of stale air carrying the scent of dust, and something else entwined of ozone, perhaps, or the ghost of electricity. The room beyond was small, cramped, illuminated by a single, bare bulb hanging from the low ceiling. Its light cast long, distorted shadows, turning familiar shapes into grotesque parodies. A low whirring sound emanated from within, a mechanical pulse that seemed to vibrate the very air. It wasn't the sound of machinery I recognized, but something older, more intricate. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me, sealing me within this hidden chamber. The cat remained outside, a silent sentinel guarding the threshold. The room was filled with stacks of documents, neatly arranged in labeled folders. Blueprints covered one wall, diagrams filled another. The foring intensified, a rhythmic drone that seemed to burrow into my skull. I ran a gloved hand over a stack of papers, the texture rough and brittle beneath my fingertips. The smell of aged parchment filled my nostrils, a dry, musty odor that spoke of forgotten knowledge. The first folder I opened was labeled Project Genesis. Inside, I found handwritten notes, technical specifications, and anatomical diagrams. The language was clinical, detached, devoid of emotion. It described, in painstaking detail, the creation of me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the mechanical thudded whirring. I scanned the documents, the words blurring together, the implications crashing over me like a tidal wave. My memories, my personality, my very sense of self-tivdy. All of it was a fabrication, a construct. The being's voice echoed in my mind, no longer a fragmented chorus, but a single, chilling pronouncement. Asterisk, you were designed, Owen, to observe, to record. Asterisk, I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of papers. They fluttered to the floor, a cascade of damning evidence. The 40 whirring seemed to mock my disorientation. I forced myself to breathe, to focus, to process the impossible reality unfolding before me. The voicemails, they weren't meant to torment me. They were a guide, a breadcrumb trail leading me to this horrifying truth. I moved to the far wall, drawn to a large schematic diagram hanging there. It was a detailed rendering of a human body, meticulously labeled with anatomical terms and technical specifications. My blood ran cold as I recognized the diagram. It was me, or rather, it was a blueprint of me, a mechanical rendering of a man who believed himself to be real. My gaze drifted to the bottom corner of the diagram, where a single line of text was scrawled in elegant script. Subject 47. The foring escalated, a crescendo of mechanical revelation. The cat let out a soft, mournful cry from beyond the door, a sound of profound sadness. I turned to look at it, and for a moment I saw something in its yellow eyes that wasn't Tate malice, wasn't Tate triumph, but pity. A silent acknowledgement of my tragic existence. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a crushing weight of artificiality. I was a puppet, a recording device, a meticulously crafted simulacrum of a human being. The foring seemed to penetrate my very being, a mechanical symphony of despair. I reached out, tracing the lines of the diagram with a trembling finger. Subject 47. The words echoed in my mind, a final devastating confirmation of my constructed self. The being's words hung in the air, a viscous residue coating my thoughts. Asterisk, you are an instrument, Owen. A vessel. Asterisk, an instrument for what? The question formed, unbidden, in the sterile space between thought and articulation. A vessel for whom? The answer arrived not as a voice, but as a cold certainty, a download of information that bypassed the need for comprehension. I was designed to absorb, to process, to alleviate. My hand trembled as I retracted it from the diagram. Subject 47. The designation felt like a brand searing itself onto my consciousness. I turned, seeking some anchor in the oppressive reality of the room. My gaze snagged on a shattered mirror propped against the far wall. It hadn't been there a moment before. The glass lay in a web of fractured silver, reflecting the room back in 1,000 distorted fragments. I approached cautiously, the fervidi whirring of the machinery seeming to intensify with each step. I peered into the broken surface, expecting to see my own face, the familiar lines of my manufactured features. What I saw instead stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't Teat, my face staring back. It was a mosaic of fractured images, swirling and shifting like smoke. A glimpse of something vast, something ancient, something suffering. A face composed of pain, of regret, of a loneliness so profound, it seemed to warp the very fabric of reality. It was the being, its visage fragmented and distorted, superimposed upon my own. The gentle rustling of parchment which had been a background hum, now swelled to a deafening whisper, a chorus of forgotten knowledge. I recoiled, stumbling backward, the metallic tang of fear coating my tongue. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the mechanical pulse of the room. I felt a wave of nausea, a visceral rejection of the truth that was being forced upon me. Designed, constructed. The cat, which had remained silent throughout my revelation, let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of warning and sympathy. It leaped from the table, its porcelain collar clicking softly against the floor, and vanished into the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. The sudden absence felt like a physical blow, a loss of a strange, unsettling companionship. My mind raced, desperately searching for a logical explanation, a loophole in this impossible reality. But there was none. The voicemails. The cryptic clues, they weren't too meant to lead me to freedom. They were a calibration, a process of acclimatization. I was being prepared for this moment, for this revelation. I was being prepared to feel safe. A final voicemail echoed in my mind, a chilling punctuation mark on the unraveling of my existence. I remembered the distorted robotic voice, the unsettling cadence. It wasn't a message intended for my ears, but a signal, a trigger. The words resonated, not as a voice, but as a command. Asterisk, begin. Asterisk, the room seemed to contract, the shadows deepening, the foring escalating to a fever pitch. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing myself from a distance, watching a puppet perform its predetermined role. My limbs felt heavy, unresponsive, as if controlled by an unseen force. I raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and stared at it, studying the manufactured details of my skin, the precise placement of the veins beneath the surface. The image in the shattered mirror shifted again, the being's face becoming more distinct, more palpable. I saw the depth of its suffering, the weight of its burden, and I felt something, a flicker of empathy, a nascent understanding of its pain. It was a horrifying realization, a confirmation of my purpose. I was designed to feel this, to absorb it, to alleviate it. The gentle rustling of parchment reached a crescendo, a wave of sound threatening to overwhelm me. The room plunged into an oppressive darkness. The screen faded to black.